Jake Meridian's starship Rusty Prophecy had seen better decades, and its navigation AI had apparently decided that speaking in ancient Terran poetry was the appropriate response to approaching any docking station. Hark! A port of cosmic dreams doth beckon, the synthetic voice intoned as Jake wrestled with the manual controls, trying to align his ship with Kepler Station's docking bay. I swear, Arya, if you quote one more line of Shakespeare while I'm trying not to crash into expensive station equipment, I'm replacing you with a calculator that can only count to 10, Jake muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as the docking clamps finally engaged with a satisfying thunk. But soft, what light through yonder airlock breaks. T's successful docking and Jake is the pilot, Arya responded cheerfully. Jake rubbed his temples and wondered, not for the first time, why he'd thought buying a ship AI from a discount electronics dealer on Mars had been a sound financial decision. The answer, unfortunately, was that it had been the only AI he could afford after his last salvage operation had netted him exactly 47 credits, and a collection of what turned out to be extremely expired ration packs. Kepler Station buzzed with the usual controlled chaos of interstellar commerce. Traders hawked exotic wares from 12 different star systems, their voices creating a polyglot symphony that somehow made sense in the universal language of profit margins. Jake's stomach rumbled as he passed a food vendor selling what appeared to be noodles that glowed faintly blue and moved of their own accord. Fresh quantum ramen, the vendor called out in accented standard. Only 14 credits a bowl. Guaranteed to satisfy you in this dimension and 3 parallel ones. Jake's remaining 17 credits felt heavy in his pocket, but he'd learned that eating on station cost more than eating aboard ship, even if ship food tasted like recycled cardboard with delusions of flavor. He navigated through the crowds toward the commercial district, where the day's auction was already in progress. The bargain bin of the galaxy occupied a converted cargo bay that had been optimistically decorated with holographic banners proclaiming incredible deals, and one being's junk is another's treasure. The auctioneer, a tall human with an impressive handlebar mustache and a voice that could probably be heard in the next star system, gestured dramatically at a collection of items that seemed to defy both logic and several laws of physics. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary sentients of all species, Zephyr Blackwood boomed, his mustache quivering with enthusiasm. Behold this magnificent lot. Item 77 Alpha includes one genuine Rigelian pet rock. Note that it's actually just a rock, which we're told is the point. One gravity-defiant toaster that only functions in zero-G environments, perfect for the spacefaring breakfast enthusiast, and one meditation crystal that our experts assure me is either deeply spiritual or mildly radioactive. Jake found a spot near the back where he could observe without drawing attention. Most of the other bidders looked like professional scavengers or dealers with enough credits to make real purchases. Jake felt distinctly out of place in his patched jumpsuit and worn boots, but Blackwood's auctions were famous for occasionally offering genuine bargains among the cosmic detritus. And now, Blackwood continued, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a mysterious whisper but still carried to the station's outer hull. We come to our most intriguing item of the day. Outpost Zeta 7, located in the scenic Helix Nebula, complete with artificial gravity, life support systems that may or may not function, and approximately 4,000 cubic meters of empty space perfect for whatever nefarious or beneficial purposes you might have in mind. A holographic display materialized above the crowd, showing a modest orbital station that looked like it had been designed by someone with a practical mind and a limited budget. Unlike the sleek, curved aesthetics popular in modern station architecture, Zeta 7 was all straight lines and functional angles, like a metal box that had sprouted docking ports and communication arrays. Starting bid is 5,000 credits, Blackwood announced. Silence filled the auction bay like vacuum filling a breached hull. Someone in the front row coughed nervously. 4,000, Blackwood's mustache twitched hopefully. More silence, punctuated by the distant hum of station life support systems. 1,000 credits for this fully equipped outpost in a strategically important location. A vegan trader near Jake leaned over to his companion. Helix Nebula's a dead zone, nothing but radiation storms and sensor phantoms, probably haunted too. 300 credits. Blackwood's voice had taken on a slightly desperate edge. Think of the possibilities: remote research station, private retreat, interdimensional smuggling base. Jake's brain performed rapid calculations involving his current financial situation, his prospects for future income, and the growing certainty that sleeping in the Rusty Prophecy's cramped bunk was affecting his mental health. Owning real estate, even questionable real estate in the middle of nowhere, suddenly seemed appealing. 100 credits, Blackwood tried again. Jake's hand started to rise, then stopped. 100 credits was more than half his remaining funds. 50 credits for this magnificent opportunity to own your own slice of the cosmos. 25, someone called out from the middle of the crowd, causing nervous laughter. 10 credits, surely someone can spare 10 credits for. 3 credits, Jake heard himself say, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. Every head in the auction bay turned toward him. Blackwood's mustache performed what could only be described as a victory dance. 3 credits, do I hear 4? 4 credits for Outpost Zeta 7. The silence stretched long enough that Jake began to wonder if he'd accidentally bid on a one-way ticket to an early grave. Going once, going twice. Blackwood's gavel came down with a resonant crack. Sold to the gentleman in the patch jumpsuit for 3 credits. As Jake made his way forward through a crowd of spacers who looked at him with expressions ranging from pity to amusement, he caught fragments of whispered conversations. Poor bastard, Zeta 7's been empty for 30 years. Heard there's something wrong with that place, something in the walls. Blackwood pumped Jake's hand enthusiastically, while a bored-looking clerk processed the transaction on a tablet that kept changing colors. Congratulations, you're now the proud owner of Outpost Zeta 7. The deed transfer should complete within 24 standard hours, and here's your access codes. The clerk handed Jake a data chip that felt surprisingly warm against his fingers. Sign here, and initial there, she said, offering him a stylus that seemed to shift through the entire visible spectrum while he held it. As Jake scrawled his signature on the digital forms, Blackwood leaned inconspiratorially. Between you and me, the auctioneer said, his voice dropping to what was probably meant to be a whisper, the previous owner was quite insistent about including a warning. With the sale, something about whispers in the walls. Complete nonsense, of course. Old spacers get paranoid after too many jumps through hyperspace. Perfectly normal station, I'm sure. Blackwood's laugh had an edge to it that made Jake's newly purchased data chip feel even warmer. 20 minutes later, Jake sat in the Rusty Prophecy's pilot seat, staring at the coordinates displayed on his navigation screen. The Helix Nebula was only 6 hours away by hyperjump, practically next door by galactic standards. Arya, plot a course for these coordinates, he said, sliding the data chip into the ship's reader. Ah, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal station, Arya replied. Course plotted. Shall I engage hyperdrive, sweet prince of salvage? Just, yes, engage hyperdrive. And maybe run a diagnostic on your poetry subroutines while we're in hyperspace. The stars stretched into lines as the Rusty Prophecy entered the swirling tunnel of hyperspace. Jake leaned back in his pilot's chair and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into for 3 credits. The Rusty Prophecy dropped out of hyperspace with all the grace of a drunken asteroid, which was unfortunately typical for Jake's aging vessel. Through the viewport, the Helix Nebula stretched before them in swirls of purple and gold, cosmic dust particles creating patterns that seemed almost deliberately artistic. Floating in the middle of this celestial light show was Outpost Zeta 7, looking remarkably intact for something he'd bought for the price of a decent sandwich. Well, Arya, it's not on fire, which is already better than my last real estate investment, Jake muttered, running through the docking sequence checklist. Remember that warehouse on Titan? Forsooth, 'twas but a small explosion, and insurance did cover most of the crater, Arya replied helpfully. Jake guided the ship toward the Outpost's docking bay, which opened smoothly despite being supposedly abandoned for decades. The docking process went surprisingly well, with none of the usual grinding noises or ominous sparks that typically accompanied Jake's attempts at precision flying. Atmospheric readings are actually pretty good, Jake said, checking his instruments with growing surprise. Oxygen-nitrogen mix is standard, pressures stable, gravity's functioning. Either this place has the best automated systems in the galaxy or someone's been maintaining it. Perhaps T's haunted by the ghost of a very conscientious maintenance worker, Arya suggested. Jake sealed his suit helmet anyway because 3-credit real estate deals rarely came without hidden complications. The airlock cycled with a satisfying hiss, and he stepped into what should have been a derelict corridor but instead looked like it had been cleaned yesterday. The walls were lined with smooth, pearl-colored panels that seemed to shimmer with their own internal light, and the floor felt solid and well-maintained under his boots. Hello, Jake called out, his voice echoing slightly. Anyone home? Ghost maintenance workers, interdimensional cleaning services. Silence answered him, but it was the kind of comfortable silence that felt expectant rather than empty, like the station was simply waiting to see what he'd do next. Jake made his way toward what his newly downloaded station schematics indicated was the central control room, passing through corridors that defied every expectation he'd had about abandoned facilities. The previous resident left instructions that you might be hungry after your journey, Delilah explained, bobbing up and down in the air with dolphin-like enthusiasm. She was very thoughtful that way. always whispering helpful suggestions about station management and proper guest etiquette. Wait, Jake said slowly, whispering suggestions to who? To me, of course, though lately her voice has been getting stronger. Sometimes I can see her reflection in the viewports, just standing there looking out at the nebula. She has the most remarkable ears, very long and elegant like crescents, quite stylish, really. A chill ran down Jake's spine that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. Delilah, exactly what happened to the previous owner. Oh, she's still here, just not in the traditional sense of here. More in the quantum entangled consciousness existing between dimensions sense. Perfectly normal for advanced beings, though it does make meal planning challenging since she doesn't technically eat anymore. Jake sat down heavily on the bed, which was remarkably comfortable for furniture in a supposedly abandoned outpost. So you're telling me I bought a haunted space station? Haunted is such an unpleasant word, Delilah said, spinning in a small circle. I prefer spiritually enhanced or metaphysically occupied. Much more positive, don't you think? As if summoned by the conversation, Jake heard it, a soft musical voice speaking so quietly he almost missed it entirely. The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carried on the recycled air like a gentle breeze. Welcome, Jake Meridian, I have been waiting. Jake looked around the room frantically, but saw only Delilah's cheerfully bobbing holographic form and his own reflection in the darkened viewport. Then, in the corner of his vision, he caught a glimpse of something impossible. A tall, graceful figure with distinctively long, pointed ears that curved like crescents, standing in the corridor just outside his quarters. When he turned to look directly, she was gone. That's her, Delilah announced happily. She's been so excited about your arrival. I think she likes you already, which is good because the last 3 people who tried to claim the station ran away screaming something about interdimensional beings and cosmic horror beyond human comprehension. Personally, I thought they were being a bit dramatic. Jake rubbed his temples, wondering if his decision-making skills had finally abandoned him entirely. Delilah, please tell me this mysterious previous owner isn't planning to drag my soul into another dimension or feed me to space monsters. Oh goodness no, she's much too polite for that sort of thing, very refined. She mostly just wants to chat about the meaning of existence and occasionally help with station maintenance. Though she does get a bit melancholy sometimes when she thinks about her people. The whispered voice came again, closer this time and tinged with what sounded like ancient sadness. 3 credits was all it took to change everything. How wonderfully absurd the universe can be. Jake decided that if he was going to have a conversation with an interdimensional being, he might as well do it properly. Okay, mysterious lady with the beautiful ears, if you want to talk, how about we do it face to face? I promise I won't scream and run away, probably. The air in front of him began to shimmer like heat waves rising from sun-baked metal, and slowly, a figure began to materialize. She appeared gradually, like a photograph developing in reverse, until she stood before him in translucent detail. Tall, elegant, with an ageless face and those remarkable elongated ears that curved gracefully from her head. Her eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Hello, Jake, she said, her voice now clear and resonant. My name is Lyreley Voidwhisper. Welcome to your new home. Jake stared at Lyreley Voidwhisper for a long moment, his brain attempting to process the fact that he was having a conversation with a translucent woman who apparently existed between dimensions. His first coherent thought was that her name sounded like something from one of those dramatic space operas Arya was always quoting. And his second was that he really should have read the fine print on that 3-credit purchase. So, Jake said finally, interdimensional being, that's new for me. I usually just deal with regular people who want to overcharge me for ship parts and terrible coffee. Lyreley's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I apologize for the unconventional introduction. Most beings find my current state of existence somewhat alarming. Well, you're definitely more pleasant than my last landlord, and he was completely corporeal, Jake said. Though I have to ask, when you say dragon lady, are we talking metaphorical dragons, or should I be worried about fire-breathing and treasure hoarding? The dragons were my people's name, not our nature, Lyreley explained, settling gracefully into a chair that Jake was fairly certain hadn't been there a moment before. We were travelers between realms, explorers of the spaces between spaces. We could step through dimensions as easily as you walk through doorways. Delilah bobbed excitedly nearby. She's being modest. The dragon ladies were legendary throughout 17 different dimensional planes. They were like cosmic diplomats, keeping peace between realities. Lyreley said softly, and something in her voice made Jake's chest tighten with sympathy he didn't fully understand. Jake sat down on his bed, which squeaked in a way that was somehow reassuring in its mundane normalcy. What happened to them? Your people, I mean. Lyrelay was quiet for a moment, her translucent form flickering slightly like a hologram with a weak power source. There was a weapon, something that could unweave the very fabric of dimensional space. It tore through our homeworld and scattered my people across realities like seeds in a cosmic wind. That's horrible, Jake said and meant it. I'm sorry. The weapon fragmented during the attack, Lyrelay continued, her voice gaining strength. Its components were scattered across multiple dimensions and hidden, but they call to each other across the void. I've been bound to this station through quantum entanglement with its crystalline core, waiting for someone who could help me gather the fragments. Jake felt a familiar sinking sensation in his stomach, the same one he got whenever Arya announced they were low on fuel in the middle of nowhere. And you think I'm that someone? You purchased this station for 3 credits from an auctioneer who had no idea what he was selling, Lyrelay said, with a smile that was equal parts sad and amused. You either have terrible judgment or cosmic-level intuition. Definitely terrible judgment, Jake said immediately. Ask anyone. I once traded a perfectly good hyperdrive for what turned out to be a very expensive paperweight. Yet here you are, Delilah chimed in, spinning in a happy circle. And since you arrived, the station's been humming with energy it hasn't had in decades. Even the coffee maker is working better. As if to prove the point, a soft chime echoed through the quarters, and Jake realized the kitchenette's coffee maker was indeed brewing something that smelled infinitely better than the recycled sludge he usually drank aboard the Rusty Prophecy. Okay, I'll bite, Jake said, getting up to pour himself a cup of what turned out to be the best coffee he'd ever tasted. How exactly am I supposed to help gather fragments of an interdimensional weapon? I can barely keep my ship running, and my most advanced skill is knowing which wires to twist together when the artificial gravity starts working backwards. Lyrelay stood and moved to the viewport, her form becoming more solid as she gazed out at the swirling nebula. The fragments respond to intent and connection. They're drawn to those who understand loss and the value of hope. You've spent your life salvaging broken things and making them whole again. That's a very poetic way of saying I'm good at duct tape and creative profanity, Jake muttered, but he found himself drawn to stand beside her at the viewport. Watch, Lyrelay said softly, raising one translucent hand toward the crystalline formations that lined the station's walls. The crystals began to pulse with increasing brightness, and Jake felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity but warmer and more alive. The station around them seemed to respond, systems he hadn't even known existed coming online with gentle chimes and the hum of awakening machinery. The station is bonded to you now, Lyrelay said. It recognizes you as its keeper. That's why everything works so perfectly, why Delilah has been maintaining optimal conditions, why even your coffee tastes better. Jake nearly choked on his coffee. You're telling me I bought a magic space station. Not magic, quantum-entangled biotechnology that responds to consciousness and intent. My people built it as a way station for dimensional travelers, but when I became bound to it, it became something more. Jake looked at Lyrelay, who was watching him with those galaxy-deep eyes, waiting for his decision. He thought about his life up until now, sleeping in the cramped bunk of the Rusty Prophecy, scraping together credits for fuel and food, wondering if he'd ever amount to anything more than a failed salvager with a ship that quoted poetry at inappropriate moments. Well, he said finally, it's not like I had any other plans. Besides, Arya will never let me live it down if I back down from an adventure this ridiculous. As if summoned by his name, Arya's voice crackled over the station's comm system. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. Even Shakespeare thinks you should do it, Delilah added helpfully. Lyrelay smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. Then welcome to the most important salvage operation of your career, Jake Meridian. Outside the viewport, the Helix Nebula swirled in patterns that no longer looked random, and Jake had the distinct feeling that his 3-credit purchase had just changed the course of his life in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. 3 months after Jake's 3-credit purchase changed everything, Outpost Zeta 7 had become the most unlikely success story in the Helix Nebula. Ships lined up at the docking bays like customers at a popular restaurant. Merchants haggled in 12 different languages in the newly constructed trading concourse, and Jake found himself wearing actual clean clothes for the first time in years. I still can't believe people pay us just to park here and use our navigation beacon, Jake said, reviewing the daily profit reports while sipping coffee that Delilah had somehow perfected to taste like liquid motivation. 17,000 credits this week alone, Delilah announced, bobbing excitedly around the central hub. And that's not counting the licensing fees for our patented interdimensional navigation enhancement system, which is really just Lyrelay helping ships find safe routes, but the bureaucrats love official-sounding names. Lyrelay materialized beside them, her form now solid enough that she could actually sit in chairs without phasing through them. The quantum entanglement with the station's crystalline core had been strengthening as more consciousness-resonant energy flowed through the facility, allowing her to maintain corporeal form for longer periods. 3 more fragments have revealed themselves, she said, gesturing toward the holographic star map that dominated the central chamber. The network of connected consciousnesses passing through the station creates ripples across dimensional barriers. The weapon pieces respond to the harmony. Jake studied the pulsing markers on the map, each one representing a fragment of the weapon that had destroyed Lyrelay's people. They'd already recovered 2 pieces, one from a derelict ship drifting in the Tau Centauri system, and another from what turned out to be the private collection of a very surprised antiquities dealer on Mars who'd been using it as an expensive paperweight. The good news is that our reputation as the lucky station means people actually volunteer information now, Jake said. That trader from the Vega system practically threw his fragment at us when he found out it was making his cargo holds randomly phase into other dimensions. The bad news, Lyrelay added with a wry smile, is that the Void Harvester has definitely noticed our activities. As if summoned by her words, alarms began chiming throughout the station. Delilah's holographic form flickered between her usual cheerful dolphin appearance and what appeared to be a dolphin wearing battle armor, which Jake had to admit was both adorable and slightly terrifying. Unknown vessel approaching from hyperspace, Delilah announced, her voice carrying uncharacteristic tension. Energy signatures are unusual. Also, Arya is requesting permission to quote Macbeth, which historically speaking has been a bad omen. Jake hurried to the communications console, where Arya's voice crackled with static and dramatic flair. By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. Also, the approaching ship appears to be made of crystallized void stuff and is approximately the size of a small moon, which seems rather excessive for a social call. Through the viewport, Jake could see it emerging from the swirling colors of hyperspace. A ship that looked like someone had carved a vessel from living shadow and decorated it with the screams of dying stars. It moved with predatory grace, and just looking at it made Jake's teeth ache. That would be our civilization-eating friend, Lyrelay said, her form flickering as she channeled power through the station's defensive systems. The Void Harvester has come to reclaim its weapon. Right, Jake said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. Delilah, evacuate all civilian ships from the area and activate our newly installed interdimensional defense array. You mean the jury-rigged mining lasers connected to the crystalline power core? Exactly, and patch me through to the Harvester's ship. If we're going to have a cosmic showdown, we might as well be polite about it. The main viewer flickered to life, revealing something that Jake's brain refused to properly process. The Void Harvester appeared to be a constantly shifting amalgamation of darkness and hunger, with too many eyes and a voice like the echo of dead worlds. Mortal, it spoke, each word causing the station's lights to dim. You have gathered what was scattered. You will surrender the fragments and accept the honor of feeding my eternal hunger. Jake adjusted his collar and tried to look professional, which was challenging when addressing an entity that looked like a nightmare having a bad day. Thanks for the offer, but I'm going to have to respectfully decline. You see, those fragments belong to my friend here, and I've got a strict policy against letting cosmic horrors eat civilizations on my watch. The Void Harvester's multiple eyes focused on him with what he interpreted as cosmic annoyance. You are but an insignificant salvager who purchased delusions for 3 credits. That's true, Jake admitted, but you know what? Those 3 credits bought me something incredible. They bought me a home, friends who care about me, and a purpose that's bigger than just scraping by from day to day. And honestly, that makes me feel pretty significant. Lyrelay stepped forward, her form blazing with interdimensional energy as the collected weapon fragments responded to her presence. The Dragon Ladies have returned, Harvester. We are no longer scattered and alone. Around the station, space itself began to ripple as other translucent figures materialized, the consciousness fragments of Lyrelay's people, drawn from across dimensions by the beacon of hope that Zeta-7 had become. They were few in number, but they carried the combined will of a civilization that refused to be erased. Impossible, the Void Harvester snarled. I consumed your people, I devoured your worlds. You destroyed our bodies, Lyrelay said, rising into the air as power coursed through her. But consciousness, hope, love, these things transcend physical form, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to believe in impossible things to bring light back to the darkness. Jake watched in amazement as the weapon fragments orbiting the station began to merge. But instead of forming the reality-tearing weapon they'd once been, they transformed into something entirely different. A crystalline lattice that pulsed with healing energy rather than destructive force. The fragments remember their original purpose, Lyreley explained, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated across multiple dimensions. Before they were perverted into a weapon, they were tools of creation, designed to strengthen the barriers between realities and protect dimensional travelers. The Void Harvester launched itself at the station with a roar that shattered 3 different laws of physics. But the transformed weapon fragments created a barrier of pure creative force that turned its destructive energy back on itself. Instead of consuming and destroying, the entity began to shrink, its stolen power flowing away like water from a broken dam. "What have you done?" it demanded, its voice growing weaker. "We've given you what you truly hunger for," Lyreley said gently. "The chance to exist without constantly consuming others. The fragments are offering you a choice. Continue your endless feeding or accept transformation into something that can find peace." For a moment, Jake thought the Harvester would reject the offer and try to destroy them all in a final act of cosmic